Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for signing in to join us for this webinar today. We're just going to hold for a couple of minutes. We're waiting for a few people to get through their systems and sign on, including one of our speakers today. So we're just going to give her a couple of minutes to organize on her end the technical challenges, and we'll be starting soon. Thank you so much, and hang tight. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for calling in and joining us today. We are going to get started, even though we are still waiting for one of our speakers to come online. So hopefully she will join us very soon, and I might talk a bit slower than I normally do to try to allow for her to have a bit more time. Emmett, can you just confirm that the sound is fine and you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Kate Oren, and on behalf of my colleague Emmett, whose voice you just heard, and who I'm sure many of you have emailed with many times, on behalf of our team in IUCN's Global Gender Office, I'd like to welcome you officially to this webinar and thank you for joining us. And we have a very interesting discussion ahead and very eager for all of your participation as well. Before we get into the substance, just a couple of housekeeping points. Everyone who has signed in today is going to be in the mute mode. This is simply to avoid background noise and connectivity disturbances, but please do not feel silenced. You are most certainly welcome and encouraged to interact in this webinar. And you can do that a couple of different ways. First, please use the chat box function in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen to send in any questions throughout the webinar. And you can, of course, specify which speaker your question is directed to, or if it's a general point. Emmett will be keeping a very close eye on that chat box. And at the end, for the second portion of the session today, we'll be going through these questions. Certainly, if you have a question for clarity for the speakers, you can enter that as well, and we'll address that sooner. So during the question and answer portion of the session, you can also use the button in your control panel to raise your hand, and then we can unmute you so that you can ask your question or perhaps share a comment or an experience from your own work. If you have any technical difficulties at all during the webinar, you can also use the chat box to chat to Emmett directly or email emmett.boyer@iucn.org. The email is there on your screen. Hopefully you are having no problem seeing the screen. And then finally, please note that this webinar is being recorded and we will make the session available online to you in the next couple of days. As you probably know, this webinar session is actually one of two parts, and we're organizing two sessions today with different sets of speakers to try to accommodate as many time zones as possible, but also to try to make space to hear from as many partners as possible. So both sessions will be recorded and made available. So this first session today, talking about gender in SRJS and specific experiences from across different initiatives, we'll focus on sharing the experiences from partners in Ghana and the Philippines. And then the second session, which is going to be organized in a few hours from now, will feature Uganda and the Guianas, Guyana and Suriname. This gender-focused set of discussions is actually part of a year-long effort from many of us offices in IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature, to organize a series of thematically focused learning sessions and sessions for online exchange. So the other sessions will be on law and business. Maybe some of you have participated in those previously, and we'll put up a schedule at the end of the webinar. Emmett, have we seen Maybell come online yet?
Not yet.
Okay, so we will just proceed. Okay, so the agenda for today is just, as I've already mentioned, I will talk for just a couple of minutes on setting the stage, reminding us all why we're talking about gender in the context of SRJS and why taking a gender perspective or using a gender lens, so to speak, is so important to realizing the results and amplifying the results that SRJS as an initiative envisions. We'll hear from Maybell as soon as she comes online with Ghana, or perhaps we'll have Noy and Maria go first with their experiences from the Philippines. And then again, the second part of this session, hopefully we'll have about 30 minutes of presentations and then 30 minutes of Q&A and discussion with all of you online. I think all of you have a sense of who we are, but here we are on the screen. I'm Kate speaking now, and Emmett is joining me on the line. I'm sure you know IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature, is an intergovernmental organization comprised of many hundreds of different governmental as well as non-governmental members around the world. We have regional offices, country offices, and project offices in all the regions of the world. As IUCN's Global Gender Office, and we are situated under the Global Program on Governance and Rights, we work specifically on supporting and partnering with a very wide range of our members, both government and non-governmental, to bring a gender perspective. We work to advance gender equality and women's empowerment across environmental and sustainable development policymaking, decision-making spheres, programming, and projects. And since 2016, we have been so happy to work with SRJS coordinating partners and many different country partners from all over the SRJS landscapes, reviewing work plans, doing very specific technical support on specific activities, and supporting capacity building initiatives in many different ways. So what are we talking about? Of course, I think we all know that SRJS from the beginning has really aimed to embed gender as a key principle. SRJS is committed to gender equality and inclusivity as guiding principles, and this means that all actions need to ensure in some way, and the ways differ and the contexts differ, but activities do need to ensure that they in some way recognize gender issues, that they do not exacerbate gender gaps or discrimination or bias, and that SRJS implementation is actually a vehicle for advancing women's empowerment and gender equality, which are, of course, internationally agreed goals, and all of our respective countries have made their own commitments on women's empowerment and gender equality in specific and unique ways, certainly, but it is a global norm. SRJS promotes gender responsive action, and this means identifying and understanding gender gaps and then taking meaningful steps to try to improve them. First, to ensure, of course, that we do no harm, and then to make every effort to do better. And this is important because we know, of course, that gender inequality is among the most persistent and pervasive forms of discrimination around the world in all of our countries. And gender inequality persists as a significant barrier to economic, social, and sustainable development. So SRJS, which is focused on, advancing climate resilience and food and water security across sectors, gender inequalities and discriminations are a barrier to that. We have on the screen just a couple of reminders of some of the gender gaps, as we call them, excuse me. And I'll focus just on the second from the bottom for just a minute. We know that even though this number has ticked up very slowly over recent years, still only 23% of all parliamentarians worldwide are women. But why does that actually matter? If you look to the last point on this screen, it matters for a lot of different reasons, not least because women and men have equal human rights to be able to participate in decision-making processes. But women and men parliamentarians also bring different things to decision-making bodies. And we know, for example, studies have shown that countries with more women in parliament are more likely to ratify environmental treaties. That's a key opportunity for SRJS and for all sorts of different programming. And of course, there are other impacts on this screen in terms of what we think of as the impact, the multiplying effect of advancing gender equality. Experience and data shows across sectors, across regions, that advancing gender equality and women's empowerment unlock potential. And SRJS recognizes that women, together with men, must be recognized and empowered as agents of change to meet their goals. This slide is really just here because that cake looks so good, but equality is not like cake. Gender equality is not a zero-sum game. More for some does not mean less for others. Gender equality benefits everybody. It is an accelerator, an amplifier, and it is a global good in and of itself. So the reason for this, the purpose, I should say, of this webinar today is to share experiences from across SRJS. I can give data and I can show the different ways that gender equality is delivering benefits across regions and sectors. But most importantly, we know from you that bringing gender capacities, gender perspectives, gender expertise into your projects is making a difference, and there is a demand for more information. So as many of you participated in, we put a survey out at the beginning of this year, interested to hear from you partners across SRJS what you were interested in. And one of the top ranked things was opportunity to hear from each other. So with that, I am going to stop talking in a moment and introduce our speakers so that we can hear directly from different initiatives. We know from different partners that the roles and responsibilities and priorities of women and men are being considered in different SRJS activities. We see that women and men are being engaged together as key agents of change. And we know that capacity building and advocacy strategies are strengthening because the gender and environment connections are being made. So I understand that we still do not have Mabel online. She must be having some connectivity issues today. That's really too bad. So I think what we're going to do then is switch our order and ask you, Noi, and Maria to present first. So Emmett, I hope that we can line up the screen and switch so that you can control the presentation. And we'll have Noi and Maria go first. So just very briefly, and I will probably ask Noi and Maria to introduce themselves a bit further when they take the microphone. But very briefly, we have these two wonderful partners from PARTS, Partnership for Rural and Technical Services Incorporated, PARTS, PARTS. Noi has worked for PARTS, Noi Panarel has worked for PARTS since 2003 and now serves as executive director. And Maria Benita Clemente has worked for various NGOs for many years, joining PARTS 6 months ago as lobby and advocacy director. And she has a lot of experience working with governments, the business sector, and indigenous peoples organizations in various landscapes. So Noi, Maria, thank you so much for joining the webinar today, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. What's the name? Great.
Kate, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Did I get it correctly? And also to all other SRJS partners. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity. As mentioned by Craig, I work with an NGO for about 3 decades now. About half of that is devoted with PARTS organization. PARTS NGO is basically an environmental NGO operating in the second largest group of islands in the Philippines, but we were more focused in Mount Malindang, Zamboanga Peninsula landscape. Our role in SRJS, among others, is to ensure that gender inclusiveness is considered in the project, whose main objective is to restore, manage, and conserve landscapes, whether that is a protected area, ancestral domain, key biodiversity area, aquamarine, for the inclusive benefits of the entire generations. We do recognize that both men and women across sectors are important agents of change, and that they have equal rights in legal, economic, and political spheres. So how did we mention gender in the SRJS project? Actually, we started it off with a research in the landscape. First, we had a general assessment of the gender condition in the area, and then we did a more in-depth gender analysis in the business industry, particularly focused in small-scale mining. From these research studies, some gender issues had surfaced, foremost of which is the gender equity and equality in natural resource use, where sense of ownership and benefits were found to be limited, including access to basic services. Gender gaps were also seen in the overall governance, where sectoral representation in the development bodies and other mechanisms of participation experience political interference, especially by the political leaders. At household level, some women also express concerns of double burden, struggling to perform both productive and reproductive roles, thereby limiting their access to employment or livelihood opportunities, or to assume leadership positions in the communities, which in many cases are assumed by men. Particularly in small-scale mining sites, the environmental safety of men and women involved in tunnel digging, ball mill, and other processes of extracting gold using mercury, including water pollution that damage marine habitats, raise also concerns and challenges for livelihood alternatives and sustainability, both for men and women. The articulations of men and women actually are rooted historically on the way the natural resources and bounties in the country are being managed and the benefits are allocated in the landscapes in general. Foreign ownership are allowed up to 40% on capital investments, usually in resource extractive industries like mining. Environmental laws and policies are enacted but not effectively enforced, if not violated more often. Some environmental policies contradict to each other. For instance, one law promotes watershed biodiversity protection, while another promotes or allows mining in important areas for food, water provisioning, biodiversity, and climate resilience. Consequently, the quality of landscape resources face continuing deterioration, and the vulnerable groups suffer from all forms of poverty in accordance with the UN definition. The affected sectors, ecology enlightened citizens, and environmental advocates take action, but more public awareness and cooperation are needed to effect positive change in behavior, policies, and practices, primarily among men and women users, as well as authorities mandated to protect and manage our resource base. From our theory of change, we aim in long-term sense the conservation, restoration, and management of landscapes in order to ensure security and sustainability of the international public goods for the inclusive benefits of the intergenerations. Some intermediate outcomes we wanted to achieve relate to accessing assistance, democratic space for genuine gender participation, sustainable livelihood practices by organized vulnerable groups, among others. One strategy that we adopted is to realize this one is to do alliance building of existing community-based organizations. For instance, women's, indigenous peoples, farmers, and fisher groups across landscapes, in order to forge unity as environmental advocates and resource managers of the resource base. For women's groups in particular, Landscape Alliance of 5 Keys has worked to uplift the rights and the socioeconomic living conditions of marginalized women in upstream and downstream areas in order to foster greater respect, dignity, and equality among men and women. The processes or steps that we do starts with scanning, profiling, and diagnosis of women's organizations. Second, we do awareness raising on women's rights. Third, we assist organizations for their legitimacy, and then we do joint strategic planning with the women's groups, including other vulnerable groups, and we engage them for technology training on organic peanut production as one option for sustainable livelihood with value chain. And the last one is coordinating and collaborating with the local government and resource agencies for assistance, especially agencies which has actually a gender program. So in terms of good practices, lessons learned, and challenges, so far we have identified 3 challenges. It's more actually of challenges rather than good practices at the moment. One is that there is a need on our side actually to focus on gender mainstreaming with a focal person on it. Because right now, there is no focal person that is focusing on gender. This is being handled by everyone. mainstream into our own programs and projects activities. Second, as we face the challenge of sustaining the women's participation because of double burden issue and so many activities also that actually limit their participation. The third challenge that we face is the political interference and sectoral representation for local development bodies and other forms of participation. So what we wanted to do as our next steps would be to further engage the women's groups on the following. One is to employ a community-based resource management approach to address resource equity issues. For instance, in water and fishery resources and forest resources, and to seek greater participation and involvement in watershed and biodiversity restoration and protection activities. Second, women capacity enhancement, gender equity, and gender policy workshops for gender inclusive participation to develop self-esteem and confidence among women. Organizational strengthening in leadership and financial management. Fourth is to engage them on livelihood skills training. And the fifth one is to engagement with cooperative for micro livelihood financing, and then linking and networking them for livelihood support and access to basic services. So in the picture, you would see there our focus landscapes. Actually, there are 4, and we are actually located on the southern part of the Philippines. On the north is the Cordillera region, and we have here on the south Mindanao region. And you would see in the screen in the map that there is a green. That green there is the Asian Heritage Park of Mount Malindang, and around it are the different landscapes in which parts is focusing at present. So that's my short presentation, and we would very much appreciate to entertain questions in a while so we can provide further information. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noy. That was so interesting. And I already have some questions for you, and I'm sure others do as well. Just a reminder, everyone, please, if you do have questions, ideas, points for clarity, please feel free to use that chat box at the side of your screen. It should be on the right-hand control panel of your screen. And we will come back to Noy and Maria in the question and answer portion, I'm sure. Thank you so much. I think now we have Maybell on the line. Maybell Agba from Ghana. Is she there, Emmett?
Yes.
Oh, great. Maybell, can you?
I am.
Ah, perfect. Wonderful. Good to hear your voice. Okay, so I will introduce you. Maybell Agba is the project coordinator at the Development Institute, DI. Maybell holds a bachelor degree in the social sciences in mathematics and economics, and she's taking courses in forest governance, monitoring and evaluation, and gender and sustainable development. Maybell has 5 years of experience working in the natural resources management sector, managing projects focused on ecosystem restoration, biodiversity conservation, food and water security, and climate resilience. Her main role at DI involves community education and awareness, capacity development for rural farmers, women's groups, and community-based organizations on sustainable and wise use of natural resources, and women's economic empowerment and women's leadership and natural resource governance. Maybell currently serves as the gender focal point for the SRJS program in Ghana. Maybell, thank you so much for joining, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emmett. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. Thank you, Emmett and Global Gender Office for facilitating this program and giving me the opportunity to share our experience in mainstreaming gender in our project. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so to start with, the SRJS project in Ghana is being implemented by two civil society organizations, the Development Institute and Arusha, Ghana. And our long-term focus is to ensure integrated governance of natural resources in Ghana. We have four broad objectives where we are looking at community stewardship of natural resources being enhanced, government mainstream biodiversity considerations into their program policies and plans, and then also businesses adopting sustainable management practices. And the fourth level is mainstreaming gender, looking at issues of social inclusiveness and gender mainstreaming. So when we did the inception phase, we did gender analysis, which identified a couple of gaps and issues that need to be addressed. So my presentation is basically going to look at introduction to the capacity building workshop that we did in Ghana, which looked at mainstreaming gender in the project as well as organization. I'll also talk about the elements that were involved in the workshop, which made it successful, the outcome of the workshop, and the next step of actions that we have, as well as a couple of lessons that we can take away. Now, based on the gender analysis that we did, we identified that there are inadequate knowledge and understanding in issues that has to do with gender in terms of the project cycle and within the organizational level, and also at government level. And we also identified that most policies and regulations in Ghana are gender blind. That is, they kind of don't add issues that has to do with gender considerations in the policy. So the training basically looked at how best we can mainstream gender using gender analysis in our project cycle and policies. We also basically had the objective of ensuring that since gender is a cross-cutting issue, we are able to look at it from that perspective. Then we also decided to understand the national and global trends and perspective in gender integration in project management. The main reason why we look at this as a key objective was the fact that Ghana has signed on to a couple of global gender policies, social issues, as well as sustainable development goals. However, it is not domesticated, and most people actually don't even understand. The people for whom the policies have been crafted for do not even know what is the next. So we thought that civil society to be good for us to understand this global trend and how we can be able to translate them down to the ground. We also thought it was very necessary for us to bring on board diverse people from different areas who work on gender in natural resource management, how best we can interact and learn from them. And within the lobbying market, networking is one of the key commodities that we can. So we thought this was also a key objective for organizing the workshop. Now, the workshop actually was facilitated by a local gender expert and was supported by the Global Gender Office. The idea for using the local expert was to ensure that we have on the ground reality someone who has been part of the whole gender mainstreaming process in Ghana, who understands the issues and can share their perspective with us for us to be able to mainstream it into the SRJS program. We made the training basically trainer of trainers course so that we can have more gender equality advocates who would also go back to their landscape and implement the training so that we have more people who are mainstreaming gender in their programs. The training basically also ensures that we have a manual that people can use as a reference point to implement the activities. We also included the gender desk officers of government, local government organization, and other civil society. At the time that we were doing this training, the district assemblies were developing their medium-term development plans. So we thought that it was very necessary for us to include the gender desk officers of the government level organizations so that when they are doing their medium-term planning, they will be able to mainstream gender in the plan to ensure that the local people, the vulnerable people are also being addressed within the plan. The whole program actually looked at collaborative and problem-based learning in a sense that we used the knowledge of most of the civil society groups that were within, as well as doing it more of adult learning, so that it's not just purely lecturing, kind of getting people, but we also wanted to see on the ground reality how people were implementing and mainstreaming gender issues. At the end of the whole program, we adopted an action plan, which basically looked at commitment from participants, how they are going to implement the lessons in their program moving forward. Now, the key outcomes, what is this? No. I'm having a bit of challenge. Okay. All right. So the key outcomes of the workshop looked at, we realized that gender has to do with issues of mindset, people's mindset are involved, and oftentimes if management does not buy into mainstreaming gender, it becomes difficult. And so at the training, we identified the need for top management level to buy into mainstreaming, both not just at the project cycle level, but also at management level. We also realized that for management to be able to understand and ensure that gender is being mainstream, it is important that we look at building the capacity of top management level who would also understand the importance of mainstreaming gender. So at the end of the whole workshop, we got full buy-in of management for developing an organizational gender policy. And out of the 14 CSO that were trained, the 8 CSO that were trained, we had 3 out of them who have started the processes for developing their organizational gender policy. And this is a key outcome because most of the CSO that came, we had a gender assessment for each of the organization. And within that, we realized that all the organizations did not have a gender policy. All that we were basically doing was just including men and women into project planning and project activities. But we saw that it is good for the organizations to do this. So management has bought into this and we have started. The other thing that we have achieved out of this whole program is to identify gender focal points for each of the organizations because they didn't have it as at the time that we had the training. Then we, at the moment, the 2 SRJS core partners that are implementing the program have set up a gender task force who have begun work on developing the gender policy to ensure that we are mainstreaming gender into our work. Now, moving forward to ensure that all that we have studied and all that we have done, we are able to mainstream gender to our program and activities, including the vulnerable groups. We have planned to have enhanced capacity of landscape actors. We work with CRIMA executive committees and women's group. And so we are looking at building capacity for the women in resources governance. We are also developing and integrating economic empowerment for all the women. And we are looking at the village savings and loans program as a means of ensuring a financial mechanism is being developed for the groups to be able to use this to manage their own program. Because one of the key challenges that the groups have had, or the landscape actors that we are working with, is having enough finance flow to be able to deliver on activities that they are working on. We have also decided to operationalize and institutionalize, have some capacity building to support the groups to develop their own gender equality priorities and action plans. We identify that as an organization, we are going to have a gender policy. Then it is also important that the groups that we are working with, they also have their own policy and action plans, which actually looks at their priority areas. Then the other action that we have moving forward is to develop organizational gender policy and action plan with support from GGO, as I've mentioned already. We are going to organize a political cafe, and this is going to look at, which will focus on pollution of water bodies and how it affects people, the laws and regulations governing water resource management in Ghana, how they are being implemented. But the key aspect that has to do with gender, we realize that women especially are the most affected when water is polluted and when there is shortage. And so we are going to see how best we will ensure that this political cafe looks at the gender dynamics in water resource management in Ghana. Then the next thing that we will do is to monitor and facilitate implementation of the gender policy and the UNFCCC gap. I mentioned earlier that even though Ghana has signed on to couple of this. And Ghana even made a submission during COP23. Most people are not aware, most CSOs are not even aware about the gender policy plan, and so we are gender action plan, and so we are going to have training for the CSOs on key elements of the national gender policy as well as the gap, and also follow up on submissions made at COP23. Then just a couple of lessons to take home from all that we have done and we have started so far in mainstreaming gender. We understand that because it is a systemic issue, we would recommend these few things. Gender mainstreaming requires conscious effort and great commitment that must go beyond just ensuring that men and women are part of project activities. It must also be looked at internally to address issues of vulnerability and the interest of communities. The effectiveness of mainstreaming gender requires top management buy-in. And so when we are working at the ground level, we shouldn't just look at bringing women to our programs. They participate in programs. Sometimes they even come, they are not fully participating. There is no full and equal participation. We have 2 women, 10 people, 10 men who come in, and we say that we have included women. But we want to go beyond that and ensure that women are fully participating in programs. Then also, no matter how good your intentions are as a staff, it is important to note that we have access and opportunity to influence decision-making processes, but we have no control over it. I'm saying this in a sense that in the years that we have been working to mainstream gender, we've gotten to a state where not everybody understands why it is important for us to mainstream gender. I even remember one of our directors asked, does it mean that mainstreaming gender, we should hire more women? No. And so we get to a point where there are times you really want things to change, but management doesn't see it like that. And you should understand that you have that opportunity to push forward, but the final decision will definitely come from them. So don't really work yourself out if it's not working, and also don't try to do it alone. Identify opportunities and powers and leverage on that. Currently, I would like to say that one of our directors is so much interested in developing the policy, and it is his interest and passion for seeing this whole process go on that is driving the process. So we see those people as champions within the organization that we can use to mainstream gender into the organizational level. Also, don't let the system frustrate you out. Continue to work for human rights and women's rights, environmental rights, but bear in mind that it takes time, because gender mainstreaming is a systemic issue, structural issues. We have a lot of, in Ghana, we have patriarchal institutional system where men are more dominated in a couple of things, but know that it takes time and it is going to work in the end. We can also reduce stress and live long when we learn to celebrate our outcomes, no matter how small. No matter the small changes that we make, let's learn to celebrate them and move on. Thank you. So since we don't have enough time, you can read more about us on our website. If you have any questions, thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Mabel. That was just wonderful, and I really appreciate your last takeaway to celebrate even the small victories, and that's incredibly important. Not least because change takes time, right? And you know, we often in all of the workshops that we do and capacity building sessions, you know, it's sometimes like when the light bulb goes on, that someone, it's often a government representative, for example, who finally kind of gets it, gets the gender dimension, gets what we're talking about, gets why it's so important, and then wants to immediately change everything. And that enthusiasm is so wonderful and so infectious. And yet it's also sort of, it can be a barrier in and of itself, because then once you see the problems, you want to fix them all, and yet change takes time. And we have to be, you know, strategic and patient. So I really appreciate the last takeaway, in particular, Mabel, but thank you so much overall for that wonderful presentation. So many interesting points have been made by both of our speakers. We only have about 12 minutes left. So I want to get straight into the question and answer. And we did receive a couple of questions ahead of this webinar in anticipation of the content that were quite interesting around indicators and as well outcome harvesting. So I wanted to give you both, Noi, but together with Maria, and Mabel, an opportunity to respond to these questions first if you have anything to share. The first question is around, perhaps you can speak to your own experiences, what indicators you have used to reflect and systematize gender and social inclusion issues into your own work plans, activities, but specifically there was a question around lobby and advocacy work. That's the first question. And the second is about what lessons have been learned on gender considerations in the harvesting outcome process. So, Noi, maybe I can give you the floor first if you have anything to share.
I'm just thinking.
Okay, sure. Maybe.
Still thinking of it.
Okay, no problem. No problem. Mabel, do you have anything to share on the indicators or outcome harvesting?
Okay, so maybe perhaps I'll speak briefly on the outcome harvesting. So we realize that, or everyone understands that gender has more to do with men and women than men, even though we recognize that women are more vulnerable when it comes to issues of climate change and land. And so what we have basically harvested from the programs that we've done is the number of participation of, or the level of participation of women in resources governance. Previously, we realized that even though women are the ones who depend more on resources, water, firewood, and when there are any issues that affect these resources, they are most affected, women's voices are not fully recognized in resources management. So through this, we have recorded high level of participation of women in natural resources governance. A lot of women voices are heard, especially the grassroots women who are mainly affected. So that is one of the key outcomes that we have harvested. And also in terms of issues that are to do with land governance in Ghana, we have worked with NetRight, who are basically working on issues of agriculture and women's rights and agriculture policy, and then land right. And what we have done in that area, or what we have harvested in that area, is making input into the land bill that is currently in the floor of Parliament. And within that policy, currently what has happened is that there is a proposal to ensure that when it comes to land, at first, women are required to bring a man. If you want to buy a land, you want to acquire any property, you need to have a man fronting you to get this. And it's very difficult for women to get access to land. But we have put within this bill to ensure that when the bill is finally passed, no woman is going to be restricted on the basis of being a woman, that you need to bring a man before you can acquire land. And so the bill, when passed, for now it is not passed, but that input is one of the key things that has been made that we can have as an outcome, because currently our understanding is that it might be accepted. So that is one of the things we have harvested in land issues of land rights. Then in terms of having financial mechanism to drive community actions, we have established the village savings and loans, and more women and men, especially also disabled people, have been brought on board in being part of the village savings and loans. And this has really helped them in terms of economic empowerment and also generating resources, financial resources for their own initiatives at a grassroots level. The other thing that we can harvest from this whole engagement is about building capacity of women leadership. And now we have a lot of women who are leading community conservation actions at the grassroots level. So basically at the outcome harvesting level, these are a couple of things that we have harvested. In terms of the indicators, I would like to think through the question for a while and then respond to that. So if Noi has anything to share on the outcome harvesting, that is fine.
Yeah, listening to Mabel, that was a really very nice, no, ideas and experience. In addition to that, in relation to the outcome harvesting, in the first indicator, one thing that we would like to find out actually is in terms of the access and control to resources. So what we are trying to figure out or plan to do, or we are even on the process of doing it right now, is to establish a community-based resource management program and projects. Let's say, for instance, in the fisheries sector, we are on the process of setting aside a certain water area, including land, land area, where the communities would have full management of the area where they could fish, protect the habitats in there. So, but we can only do that by way of helping them in like how do we call that? It's more of the ordinance making, like providing a legal support system, because accessing and controlling the resources would need also some legitimacy, especially on the side of the government. So you have to do a lot of lobby here and advocacy work with the government to provide that opportunity. And that is why we really invest on our side in terms of capacity building. This is one indicator that we want to also find out, that the women leaders would have the capacity to manage and lead their organization, and through skills building, and also not only that, participation in the governance processes, because in the Philippines there are avenues actually where both men and women can participate in local development bodies, as well as other mechanisms. But then sad to note that in this respect there are some level of political interference by the elected leaders. But we do believe that with a very strong commitment and enlightened uh, leadership among women organization, this barrier can be overcome by them. And so to sum up again, so two indicators we wanted to find out: access and control by women and men on their local resources. Second point is active participation and quality representation and governance processes. And the third point is capacity to manage and lead their organizations. I think these are three indicators that we would like to harvest in the process.
Thanks, Noy. That's wonderful. And I would just add a very small comment to the discussion on indicators for all of the partners. And I know this question comes up a lot, is how to really capture gender considerations through indicators. And one of the first steps always is to disaggregate wherever you can in your indicators. I think Noy put it so nicely. Much of what indicators are trying to capture, broadly speaking, is around access and control. So one of the important questions to ask is who accesses, who controls, and who's participating. So getting to the original question, which was like sort of the low-hanging fruit in terms of systematizing an approach for indicators: disaggregate, disaggregate, disaggregate as much as possible, and then look at who again is there with you. And I think both the experiences shared from Ghana and the Philippines have highlighted in particular the importance of coalition building, of women's organizing, of women's organizations and networks and cooperatives as part of these core initiatives. Emmett, I know that we've had some questions come in through the chat box, which I'm having a bit of a technical challenge to actually see. So I'm going to ask you to take the floor and go through a couple of those questions in the time remaining.
Sure. Thank you, Kate, and thank you, everyone. have been amazing presentations. I'm really happy that we've been able to benefit from your all's experience. So the first question we have is from Emanuela. I think it's a clarification for Noy and Maria. Noy, in your presentation, you stated that among the challenges was having a gender focal point and that everyone is tackling gender. And I was wondering, was that intended as a challenge, or is that one of your best practices? Because Emanuela is wondering, is that not what we want, each and every individual to champion gender equality issues? Could you clarify on that point?
Yeah. Actually, because we are operating as a small organization, actually we only are 5 people here. So it's pretty difficult on our side to actually assign someone to work specifically on gender mainstreaming alone. So what we do in the context of our theory of change, we sort of make it as part of the project activities that gender would really be a conscious effort on our side. So we do, not assign anyone here, because after all, gender mainstreaming is not just about women, but it's also about men. So and in our projects across the landscapes, whether that is in the forest area, the fisheries, and the mineral resources, both men and women are involved in here. So so that particular cases, we sort of try to resolve ourselves. That if resources would have allowed, we could have assigned someone to really focus on it. But at the same time, because we are operating just a very small organization, it's better to integrate this concern to each individual in a planning process.
Okay, great. Thank you, Noy. And our second question comes from Dorcas, and it's for Mabel. Dorcas is wondering, there's a National Gender Sub-Working Group for RED+. What is the collaboration between SRJS Gender Task Force and National Gender Sub-Working Group? It's very important for this collaboration to enhance sustainability. What do you think, Mabel?
Okay. All right. Thank you. So before I answer that question, I just want to go back to the indicators that we're talking about. I think Kate mentioned rightly about disaggregation of data. And I think that it's really important that we do not just sex disaggregated data, but also gender disaggregated data. And that really helps us in terms of gender budgeting, so that we kind of focus on how we can budget in such a way that issues that has to do with both sexes are being addressed, and the roles that men and women play, and enough budget is being allocated to support those needs. All right, so that is just what I want to add to that. Then to go straight to the question that has been asked, the REC Plus process, personally, I haven't been involved, but the other organization that we are partnering with, Arusha Ghana, was so much involved throughout the development process, the RED Plus process. And IUCN Ghana has Sadia, one of their staff, who is on the platform. She's the one who is leading this whole thing. We have been collaborating with her on an organizational level, but not at program level. So as we have started this whole process for mainstreaming gender within our organization, we are going to be working directly with them. I understand the need for building synergy and not doing things and also duplicating efforts. So the process has just begun for mainstreaming gender within our institutional level. So we are going to build on that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mabel. And our next question is also for you, from Ning, who works for the Environmental Law Center at IUCN. She's asking that you mentioned the gender work aims at promoting human and women's rights and environmental rights. And she's wondering, how were these rights addressed in the training? And did you conduct an analysis of the legal and policy frameworks?
Is it to me?
Yes, it's to you. Sorry, Mabel.
Okay, could you please repeat the question?
Yeah, so Ning is wondering how human rights and environmental rights were addressed in the training workshop, and if you conducted an analysis of the legal and policy frameworks.
Okay, thank you. So for the aspect that has to do with the human rights and environmental rights, we looked at the need, the training focused on the need for conducting a gender analysis before any program or project is being implemented, as it helps to identify the gaps and also to address those gaps. So that was one of the key aspects of the training, looking at gender analysis. Then the other thing that the training looked at has to do with issues of communication in addressing sexual violence, but we are not working on that, but how you even communicate some of your programs and interventions in the community such that you are not replicating certain gender inequality issues within the communities. So at the training level, we just look at broadly issues that has to do with disabled people, their vulnerability, addressing their vulnerability, and also looking at land right issues, how we can help women to have access to land. We also look at in terms of decision making. And one of the key things that featured is the need to build enhanced capacity of women, giving them a voice so that they are able to speak up for themselves. Because it is not all the time that NGOs can be leading the process and be speaking for these groups, but when we give them a voice, we build their capacity, we show them how to lead the process themselves, then they themselves will be able to speak up for their own rights. And then in terms of the environmental rights, we have been working with the groups themselves and as well as government entities to ensure that issues of climate change are being worked on. And the groups are doing a lot of planting, watershed management, that is planting a lot trees along their water bodies to ensure that environmental issues that affect them are being addressed at their community level.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mabel. So our last comment is from Teresa, and she says that setting aside a budget on gender-related activities in programs and projects is an important indicator in mainstreaming gender. In the Philippines, there is a law requiring governments to set aside 5% of their budget for gender concerns. Implementing this, however, is a challenge because some politicians use it for different purposes instead of empowering women and improving equal access and opportunities for the rights of men and women. Maria Noy, I don't know if you have a response to that, but that is the last comment that we received on the question.
Thank you for that. That's indeed a very good observation, because in the Philippines, there is actually what you call a gender and development program that receives actually a regular budget from the government. That yes, it's correct that to some extent, some politicians would use it to enhance personal interest. So what we would try to actually influence here, based on our project intervention, is to first capacitate the women organization by way of strengthening their legitimacy, because unless the women organization on the ground are strongly being recognized, it would be very difficult for them to access resources actually which is allocated in the GAD. And so part of the process is to actually educate them on the Magna Carta of women, because there is a law in the Philippines on the Magna Carta of women's rights. And so we are actually, and it's very unfortunate because based on our initial assessments, women's on the ground did not actually know about the existence of this Magna Carta. It's a bundle of rights actually for women, and part of that is actually to demand from the government, to demand the basic services from the government, which is actually through budget allocation, which is in the under the gender and development program. So legitimacy is one part. Another one is education on the rights, and then the third one would be representation actually in the policy making processes, where women would be represented in the development bodies, because that is one way where they can actually lobby for specific support to projects that women would wanted to have in their communities.
Thank you so much, Noi. Thank you, Noi, Maria, and Maybell as well for the wonderful presentations. We've now run some minutes over the hour, so we're going to come to a close. But I think that this has been a really interesting and wonderful discussion. And we will continue it with the other speakers in just a couple of hours. So I really want to thank all of you for signing on today. We realize that this conversation may be generating more questions for you, and as you go back into your own work, you may have questions for each other or as well for us. So certainly we invite you to contact us as the gender team at IUCN anytime with specific questions, comments, points for even just brainstorming about. We're happy to do that. And for our speakers today will be, if you have any resources that you would like to share with the other partners, we will be in touch with you on that, and so that we can have we can circulate resources. For example, Mabel, you were mentioning the manual that you prepared for the training, which might be quite interesting for other partners to be able to see if that's something that you can make available, but no need to answer now. I'll follow with you directly on that. So thank you very much. And on your screen, you just have information about the next webinars in this technical series that will be coming up in months ahead. We're basically rotating every month on the theme, so please stay tuned from our colleagues in the Environmental Law Office as well as the Business Office. And we hope to hear from many of you in the webinar in just a couple of hours. So thank you all very much again, and we will be in touch soon. Have a great day, everybody.